Hello, welcome to part 5 in the history of the Mass. I call this section the Mass Space for a King, and you'll see why in just a moment. It is also subtitled The Mass of the Basilicas. Remember, we have just moved from the church surviving underground in catacombs until this period of history, and then bursting, if you will, to a church something like the picture. You have in front of you a picture of a basilica. This happens to be Constantine's own basilica. Look at the inside. I mean, how immense it is. And the basilicas of then and today did not have chairs. It was a complete open space. Now look at our timeline. Our timeline, of course, is running from about the year 313 until the Council of Trent in the 1500s. Now across the pictures, I have an expression called function following form. What we're saying here, at least those who study aesthetics and architecture say, that how you're going to use a building is determined by its form. And as we're going to see in this section, Constantine built these churches and said, here you are, use them. So then the Mass, the function, had to follow and survive in a space as you're looking at on the far right. Let's get into this. You'll find it very interesting. Here's the summary panel. I called the Mass of the Basilicas. We're talking from the period of the Edict of Milan. That is when Constantine, after he became emperor, decreed freedom of religion for Christians, 313. This whole phenomenon of the basilica began in Rome and spread to the Christian Mediterranean. The time is, we see in the timeline, about the 300s to the 1500s. Attending, of course, were always, because this was the high worship of Christians, baptized Catholics alone. The preparation is a single altar in a room fit for a king. The environment is grandiose. There's no better word for it. It's a place for a meeting with royalty. That's exactly what Constantine used the basilica for. It was his throne room. It was the place the ordinary people came to see the emperor. Now, in the middle of the frame here, I talk about the word because it's very important. The basilica is it's a Greek word. It translates a palace or a large hall. And of course, the Latin comes from the Greek. The Latin is basilica. It's used for the word royal. It's feminine. It's a feminine form of basilikos, which means royal. Here's the interesting tie-in. The Greek, basilikos means royal. But basileus is the word for a king. So the point we're making here is that a basilica is related to the very word for a king. In Rome, applied specifically to the 7 principal churches founded by Constantine, all of which we'll see in this section. Let us talk about the structure of a basilica. Here on this frame I have a cutaway from the side, and then an image from an aerial image. And you see the early basilicas, and even today there's nothing wrong with a flat ceiling. Now this particular drawing has 2 side aisles, which is not uncommon. Now looking down, you see it's a very long, straight building, very high, with a kind of at one end we're going to call it an apse, A-P-S-E. It's the sanctuary area where the throne of the emperor would be, where the throne of the bishop would be, and maybe where the altar was located. The other apse at the opening was the entrance. All right. There's also a transept, which is a section that crosses the main section. Perhaps this might be called a transept. Most transepts became closer and closer to the apse, so that the entire form became like a cross. Then there is a nave. This is the central open area leading from the front door to the apse. This is the nave. This is the nave. There is an aisle. They're placed on the sides leading toward the front. You see one aisle here on this aerial view and one aisle there. Here you see this cutaway. There are 2 aisles. there is a narthex. This is an open area just before entering the nave. It's like an outer porch. It would be something akin to this area here. And lastly, the atrium. It's the word for a Roman house. It's the foyer or receiving area near the entrance. This may well have been called an atrium. All right, we got our bearing. Who's the man? Constantine. He was an emperor, and he was a builder. And remember, in the ancient world, when you became an emperor, when you became a king, you left your imprint on all humanity by the things you built. Same with Constantine. He lived from 274 to about 337. His edict, as we've already seen, in 313 recognized Christianity. He set out building great churches through Rome, fit for a king, and named them with the title of a king, a Basileus. On the right here is an icon. You may not know this. A lot of people don't know this. In the Greek Orthodox Church, both Constantine and his mother are considered saints. Notice the halo around each of them. Now his mother, Saint Helena, is known for her discoveries in the Holy Land. She left the comfortability of Italy and went to the Holy Land to discover the places where the life of Jesus happened. And of course, this is very close. The closest, I suppose, we could hope to be to the very life of Jesus and the people who venerated those places, as well as the relics. She's most known for discovering relics, the true cross, the nails, etc. Of course, it began in Constantine's life as in secular buildings. There's a particular basilica of Maxentius. He was a co-emperor with Constantine for a while, and then when he was killed, of course, it became his alone. So it's often called the Basilica of Maxentius or the Basilica of Constantine. It was begun by Maxentius in 306, but finished by Constantine after 313, hence there are two names. This was the last non-Christian basilica built on the Roman Forum. It was built for commercial and administrative purposes. Parts of the Velia Ridge, which is a geographic area between the Esquiline Hill and the Palatine Hills of Rome, had to be leveled for the basilica. These are the ruins today of the Basilica of Constantine. This is an aerial view of how large it was, and here is a drawing of what it looked like inside. Here is some more. This is immense to this day. Look at this. Look at here, the inside here, the part of the apse, part of the aisle. Look at this. Look at this. It's incredible. Constantine's throne room in Trier, Germany. He built this. This was his throne room, the largest surviving single-room structure from Roman times, built in 310. The Romans wanted the architecture to express the magnificence and the might of the emperor. Look at that building. You came across that on walking on the street. What would you think? Here is the inside. Today it's a Byzantine church. The chairs were not there. This was a completely open space except for up there in the apse, that's the apse, would have been Constantine's throne. You probably know already from your study of world history in high school that Constantine is also known for the beautiful arch that he built in Rome as an arch of triumph. There's a picture of it as it exists today. Here is a sketch with some of the measurements, and this kind of breaks up by colors his tribute to the emperors who preceded him, Trajan, Hadrian, Marcus Aurelius, by color. And so the portions of the arch resembling these colors are tributes to those emperors who went before him. You may not know this, but it was Constantine who built the first Basilica of St. Peter between the year 333 and 390. St. Peter's the first. Here is a sketch of it. It's all we have left because the present Basilica, notice the name, of St. Peter's is built over this particular spot. Here is a drawing of the inside, a sketch of the inside of the basilica itself. Now remember, I don't want to get into this now, but other things that I have taught, especially the history of the church, Constantine had to level a pagan, he didn't level it, he filled in a pagan cemetery so that he could find level ground to build the first Basilica of St. Peter. And that now that the basilica is complete and supported, excavations below St. Peter's exhibits amazing, absolutely amazing. I've been there to see the Colosseums and the burial sepulchres of ancient Roman. And he did it. He got away with it because he was emperor. Over the doorway to the first Basilica of St. Peter's, there was a saying, of course it's all destroyed now, and you see that towards the bottom there in Latin. I'm not going to bore you with the Latin, but I will call your attention to the translation. This is the quotation that Constantine had placed on the first Basilica of St. Peter. And he wrote, because the world, excuse me while we go forward here, I don't know how we got behind, because the world under your conduct, your capital Y, meaning God, because the world under your conduct has risen triumphant to the very heavens, Constantine the Conqueror has built this temple in your honor. Remember, this guy, while he may have professed to be a Christian, he was not baptized until his deathbed. Now, besides St. Peter's, he is known for having begun, having built, having influenced the 7 major basilicas in Rome today. Here they all are. This is St. Peter's. There is the Tiber River. This would be Vatican on this side of the Tiber. Then there is St. Mary Major. Then there is the Lateran Basilica, St. John Lateran. This was the home of the Pope for centuries. This is St. Lawrence outside the walls. Then there was a church that Constantine called the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. Then there was the Basilica of St. Sebastian and the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls, where St. Paul was martyred. There they are, the 7 basilicas of Rome, also known as, and we're going to see that in part 5b, the station churches. There are other Christian basilicas. I'm going to repeat some here. Here is St. Paul's outside the walls, magnificent. These are photographs now. These are not drawings. Here's St. Mary Major. Look at them. Now that you know what a basilica is, look at the qualities of a basilica. Notice the flat ceiling, not arches. And here is St. John Lateran. This would be the parish church of the Holy Father, the Pope, Bishop of Rome. Here is one that is not a station church, but the Saints Marcellinus and Peter. Here's St. Lawrence outside the walls. And here is another basilica of St. Sabina. Look at that. Magnificent structures. But that was only the tip of the iceberg. Because his mother was so committed to the Holy Land and the places that she discovered as the spots where Jesus was born, for instance, where he died. She really was responsible for preserving not only Golgotha, but also the tomb of Jesus. In the Holy Land, he was responsible because she discovered the Basilica of Bethlehem, the place where Jesus was born. Here is a sketch of it, and here it is today. There it is. Does it look like a basilica? Of course it is. Of course it is. There is part of the outside structure of the basilica. It holds, of course, monasteries now that were not there at the time. But I have one picture on the right here. And this particular archway is right there. That that doorway, you see the little bit of that oil and blood. That's where I hit my head. And one way to stop malicious kings and their sons, the princes, from taking horses and going right into the basilica was to, you can see where the original entranceway was. They made the entrance smaller so a horse and a rider cannot get in there. It's the truth. That is the truth. One of her biggest finds and one of Constantine's great contributions outside of Rome was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, Christ's tomb. Now let me show you, I'm going to spend a few minutes, this is very important because it's germane, it's important to us even today, and should you ever take a tour to the Holy Land, this is what you can expect to see. His mother had no problem, only the year 333, that is not far distance in time from the life of Jesus and the preservation of places and for events of Jesus' life in the Holy Land. So she came across the exact spot. She found where Calvary was, where Golgotha was, and where the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea was. And Constantine was committed to build the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to commemorate both the place of death of Jesus and his burial, and therefore his resurrection. When she rediscovered these, notice this area in dull brown. These were rock formations. He knew from his building the first Basilica of St. Peter, he had to level the ground in order to build a good, strong basilica. So he leveled. All that brown was leveled by Constantine, preserving the spot of Christ's tomb and also the top of Golgotha. Notice he only left a kind of upcropping of stone, which is still there, right there today. All the rest is gone in order to build this magnificent double-domed Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If you look to the right here, upper right, you see those two domes are still extant. All right? And inside, under the larger dome, is this. It's a church within a church. He built this church, this kind of a small monument over the very tomb of Jesus in Joseph of Arimathea's family burial place. And there it is today. There it is today. And it's very small inside. Only 4 to 6 people can go in at a time. Here's a cutaway view showing what it would have looked like. There would have been the Roman guard. There would have been the stone that was rolled away. There would have been an antechamber. Another time we can talk about when was Jesus removed, or how was he removed from the cross? Could they have possibly got the nails out of his wrists while they were still at the top of Golgotha? Probably not. He may have been taken into this first chamber in order to give them the space and the privacy to take the nails out of his wrists, and then he would have been laid in a niche. This altar, by the way, is right over, there is a glass panel there, right over the top of the hill of Calvary where Jesus was crucified. And you can get down on your knees and look down and you can see the stone. Now let's get back to the Mass. What are the developments during this era? And I'm only going to take from about the 350s to the 400s. You don't have to look back. We don't have to go back to the inside of a basilica to say that in order to get to an altar, a single altar up front, close to the apse, you had to process. So you processed from a dressing area inside the front doors all the way to the altar. You needed processions. You needed processions. And they have their origin here. Another stage of development was the courtly ritualized movement in the sanctuary. That's what we call ritual. Metered chant, Gregorian chant had its origin in this time. Litanies were sung, Kyrie eleison. All this is part of this early era. Incense, of course, because a lot of reasons, I suppose, for people of this age who did not wash nor neither their bodies nor their clothes, often you needed incense to tolerate people close to you. Bells. How would you know what's going on at the altar if you didn't have bells? They come from this era. You began kissing sacred objects. We saw this as its origin in the catacombs over the tomb of martyrs. And genuflections, part of this 350s to 400. Candles, well, you are not going to get enough natural light through those high windows in basilicas. You needed candles, the use of candles. And you see some images today, we kind of celebrate candles. How very often in my life people, Protestant Christians, have asked me, why do you candles A lot of you Christians get off on candles. And I said, well, because we were around before electricity. Here we're talking mid-century, about the 350s again to 400s. Clothes worthy of a senator. It was Constantine who demanded these. He said, if you're going to perform as bishops in the sacred ritual of the Mass, you better look like the Sunday dress, excuse the play on words, of a Roman senator. And here's some very ancient frescoes that kind of show the outer garments of bishops. Simple plates, of course, that would have been used in house churches in the catacombs, become elaborate chalices and patens. People wanted to surround the Blessed Sacrament with utensils worthy of who they were. Again, in this period, communion by the faithful was in the hand, following the Last Supper and the custom of house churches. Look at St. Cyril of Jerusalem, writing between 313 and 386, counsels the faithful to make a throne of your hands in which to receive the King in Holy Communion. Great care must be taken for any fragments which might remain in one's hands, since just as one wouldn't let gold dust fall to the ground, so one should take even greater care when it is a question of the body of the Lord. St. John Damascus in 730 wrote, the bread and the wine are not mere figures of the body and blood of Christ, God forbid, but the deified body of the Lord himself. For the Lord has said, this is my body, not this is a figure of my body, and my blood, not a figure of my blood. And on the previous occasion, he had said to the Jews, except you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. For my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed. And again, he who eats me shall live. Wherefore, with all fear and a pure conscience and certain faith, let us draw near, and it will assuredly be to us as we believe, doubting nothing. Let us pay homage to it in all purity, both of soul and body, for it is twofold. Let us draw near to it with an ardent desire, and with our hands held in the form of a cross, let us receive the body of the crucified one, and let us apply our eyes and lips and brows and partake of the divine coal. I won't complete that. You can read it yourself. Again, in the same period, the rise of extraordinary bishops, great church fathers, St. Augustine, St. John Chrysostom. The same time in that open space, I mean, how do you feel unconnected with people except to have a lot of space around you? There was a decline in active participation. There was a removal of the assembly by screens of stone that hid the choir. The Mass remained in Latin. There were side altar masses. The priest faced the wall and prayed in Latin. And people ceased going to communion because the Eucharist was presented as being beyond people's holiness. This is the period the church had to then mandate at Easter duty. The estrangement prompted people to ask the priest to hold up the host for their viewing and adoration. Hold it higher, sir priest, they said. Priests were stipended, given money to hold the host longer. People went from church to see Jesus. And of course, it isn't a leap of logic to say from a prolonged elevation of the host, adoration of the Blessed Sacrament became popular. Beautiful. Now, developments in this area, now we're talking between the 400s and the 600s, or the beginning of the Latin Mass in Rome, are wrapped in almost total darkness. We don't know what was developing. The only difference between the Latin Mass as we know it and the Greek Mass of Hippolytus, which we saw a couple parts of the series ago, are one or two prayers by the celebrant in the Foremass. A prayer over the gifts, an ever-changing text for the preface before the Sanctus, and a prayer after communion. There was a stability in the canon of the Mass, the unchanging text, from the Te Igitur, the You, O Lord, to the concluding doxology and the continuation of texts from the Pater Noster, the Our Father, to the dismissal. Pope Benedict XIV, 1744 to 1758, wrote, quote, the canon is the same word as a rule. We see that when we talk about the canonization of saints, or the canon, the list of books of the Bible. The Church uses this name to mean that the canon of the Mass is the firm rule according to which the sacrifice of the New Testament is to be celebrated. The Mass of Rome developed in Rome itself. Between the 200s and 500s, the first thing was to translate the liturgy from Greek to Latin. The core of the Roman canon existed by the end of the 300s. The beginning of the Latin Mass in Rome and the West generally is not until the 6th century, so we're talking the 500s. The core, the canon, from the Quam Oblationem, this offering, on, including the sacrificial prayer after the consecration, was already in existence by the end of the 4th century. The only new elements that this canon exhibits is the prayer that the gifts will be graciously accepted and the explicit prayer for a change in these gifts. By the early 400s, the canon included the Te Igitur, you therefore, O Lord, remember, O Lord, and this offering, but the Cum Communicantes was not found, the Hanc Igitur and the Memento Etiam and the Nobis Quoque. Pope Gelasius I from 492 to 496 finished a canon. So there was no fixed canon, but a living custom, a tradition. There were other various liturgies during this period. There was a Roman African and the Gallic, French. The Gaelic subdivided into the Celtic, Old Spanish, and Mozarabic, and the Milanese or Ambrosian. The liturgy did not last long. Someone to preserve such traditions in the 300s worked out a basic text of the Roman canon. In the same era, other portions of the Roman Mass were altered and amplified. Regular tripling, or even quadrupling of a priest's prayers. One or two at the beginning, one over the sacrificial offerings, and one after the communion. The documents of the 500s still show the Mass beginning with the readings followed by the general prayer. Were these the prayers of the faithful? We don't know. For the Church. The general prayer for the Church was part of the Roman rite under Pope Felix I. Pope Gelasius I removed the general prayer for the Church and had substituted the Kyrie litany. The framework of the Roman Mass must have been essentially determined by the turn of the 5th century, especially for the prayers said by the priest. In this same period, the word missa, meaning missio or demission, is a dismissal from the ite missa es, and it emerged around the end of the 4th century. So the divine service, referred to as a unit, the missa or a mass, appeared about 400. The books of the old Roman liturgy were collected. There appeared to be a Liber Sacramentorum, or the Sacramentarium, for the Pope, or celebrating bishop, the Apostolus, for the reader of the epistle, the Evangelium, for the deacon reader of the gospel, text for groups of singers, the Schola Cantorum, and the Cantatorium, for the individual chanter-singer, a book of directions, the Ordines, rubric books for clerics. 3 sacramentaries or versions of the ritual and content for the Eucharist exist. One was the Leontine Sacramentary, about the 600, finished about 540. The Gelasian Sacramentary, about the year 700, a Roman Mass book. And the last and most important was the Sacramentarium Gregorian, no later than the 800s. This is Pope St. Gregory actually produced this Mass book, prayer text still in use today, and the prefaces for Easter and Ascension. There appeared a book, a papal feast day, and stational missal. Gregory the Great modified the Kyrie, the Our Father, the Pater Noster, the preface, and the Hanc Igitur. To him is accredited singing, especially old simple chants between the readings, processional chants at the beginning, and the offertorian communion. In Rome, simple services were held Sundays and feast days, and a community service conducted by the Pope, we'll learn more about that soon, in the day's statio, or station. So the station churches were churches that were appointed for special morning and evening services during Lent, Easter, and some other important days. The tradition started in order to strengthen the sense of community within the church in Rome, as this system meant the Pope would visit each part of the city and celebrate Eucharist with the congregation. All right, this is the Mass, the end of the Mass of the Basilicas, Part 5a. You can go on now to the Mass of the Basilicas, Part 5b.